In this segment of the course, we are trying to answer the question or questions such as, what is technology? What counts as technology? I'm not going to present here an exhaustive survey of definitions of technology. Instead, I want to concentrate on certain questions about technology and certain aspects of technology. One of the reasons why a survey of the many definitions of technology would not be very useful in this course is that technology is not in and of itself a separate phenomenon in the world. This one's counter to one very common definition of technology, namely that it is the application of science to practical purposes. This implies a clear distinction, if not separation, of technology from science. However, few scholars think that this holds up as a definition. Yes, we use technology to denote science applied to achieve practical purposes, but this does not mean that we think of technology as a separate entity from science. Some scholars use the term technoscience to express the inseparability of technology from science. For example, Elaine Graham, whom we will be reading later in the course. In the social sciences and humanities, we talk about science and technology studies, and this course would fit in that category. One concrete example of how in contemporary scientific research there is no clear boundary between fundamental science and technological application is the investigation of graphene. I'm taking this as an example because graphene is going to be a major focus of our class sessions on nanotechnology. Graphene is a supermaterial derived from graphite, the lead that you find in pencils. But when graphite is stripped down to a layer of carbon just one atom thick, it takes on super properties. It becomes the strongest and thinnest material known to human beings, but is also an excellent conductor of heat and electricity. Since its initial discovery in 2004, a host of other surprising properties have been found that simultaneously advance the field of quantum mechanics and disclose the possibilities for new technologies. Amazing things happen when and how you stack layers of graphene on one another. In one article recently published in Nature Nanotechnology, the scientists write, multi-layer graphene and its stacking order provide the fundamentally intriguing properties of tuning a material from metallic to semiconducting and superconductivity, as well as the ability to technologically engineer a transparent electrode, an interconnect for integration, and numerous other applications. One intriguing part of the graphene story is that world-changing technologies of graphene exists in the minds of scientists rather than in the real world. This is a point to bear in mind when we read Jared Diamond's book chapter, Necessity's Mother. The fusion of science and technology is also not something that is unique to our contemporary or modern world. It has always been the case because when we seek to understand the world, we also seek to change it. When human beings investigate the fundamental components and forces of nature, they are also looking for ways in which these can be manipulated. A good example of this is the career of John Dee. John Dee, who lived in the 16th and 17th centuries, is one of the founders of modern chemistry. But his motivation was the pursuit of alchemy. He wanted to understand and harness the chemical properties of matter so that he could transform base metal into gold. He was also a mystic, and this is not unusual in pre-modern and early modern technoscience. Astronomy has its ancient roots in astrology. Today, we think of astrology as a superstition or pursue it as a guilty pleasure when we look up our horoscope. Yet in the ancient world, the movement of the heavenly bodies were thought to control what happened on Earth. Ancient astronomy, therefore, included the mystical contemplation of the heavens, but also the practical endeavor of working out what the effect of the movement of heavenly bodies would have on the fates of individuals and communities. The mystical and religious element of technoscience disappeared from formal scientific culture after the 17th century, but as we shall see later in the course, still hovers on its margins. In short, as we try to disaggregate science, technology, and religion, we will become ever more aware of the bonds that bind them together. I now want to turn to the way in which we think about technology by naming technological things. Let me start by criticizing the idea that technology, at least human technology, is about tools and making tools. Man, the toolmaker, was the dominant mode of thinking about human evolution and technology as a gauge by which we could measure the development from earlier hominids to our modern species. For many reasons, this view has in recent decades lost scientific credibility. I'm not going to enumerate all of them here. I'm just going to point out that tool making is not an activity uniquely limited to homonyms. Animals, especially other primates, also make tools and can change their use of tools based on their environment. That is, they are capable of technological innovation. Next week, when we read Richard Wrangham, we will see that it is not tool making, but the control of fire that puts human evolution on track to the emergence of our species and of our capacities for technology. Another problem with equating technology with tools and tool making is that it focuses solely on how technology transforms the external world. In this narrative, the usually male nuclear scientist of the 20th century is inside still the caveman. But the caveman, for his innate creativity, started us on a path to a technological accumulation of things: arrows, wheels, levers, cement, clocks, steam engines, cars, televisions, that force us to make technological innovations such as writing and the printing press, and so leads inexorably to the well-educated nuclear scientist who drives his car to his office, where he works on designing an ever better atomic bomb that can destroy the world. There is a technological determinism attached to the view that technology is about tools, and this led in the 20th century to a tragic recasting of man the toolmaker. We will see the critique of this technological determinism in the negative assessments of technology by Marcuse and Ellul that we will read later in the course. In their view, the tools that man has created have come to dominate him and may eventually destroy him. Another way of naming technological things is to call them machines. This naming occurs in an important definition of technology in Ian Barber's book, Ethics in an Age of Technology. Barber's influential work of the early 1990s proposes a theoretical description of technology as the, quotes, application of organized knowledge to practical tasks by ordered systems of people and machines. This description is excellent in many ways because it emphasizes the social dimension of technology. For knowledge to be organized, there need to be social institutions and groups entrusted with the practical tasks which technology is used to address. The implementation of technology requires not only a grasp of the scientific principles, but also the administrative competence to gather the labor and materials necessary for the project, the cultural ability to present the task as worthwhile and consonant with the values of a society. Indeed, a range of social and cultural knowledges which organize together make a project feasible and gain its support. However, a 20th century reader may balk at the expression people and machines. Is Barber thinking of humans and robots working together? No, the phrase people and machines indicates that Barber, who lived from 1923 to 2013, indeed was a person of the 20th century. For him, the prime location of technology was the factory. He was working out of an industrial paradigm of technology. I will be discussing at length different and changing paradigms of technology in the class session on Jared Diamond. In the industrial paradigm, the site of technology is the factory, and technology manifests itself in machines. How we name technological things reveals our historical location. Today, when we identify technology, factories and machines are not going to be in the forefront of our minds. In the present, writers often talk about technological things through the abstract term instruments. Our creation and use of technology is instrumental, through which we seek to have an effect on the physical world, society, and ourselves. Nowadays, we sometimes encounter technological things in general being named as devices. I think that this is an intriguing sign of how information technology has supplanted the industrial paradigm of technology. For us, technology exists in an interplay between information and the devices that we need to deliver it. The smartphone and the YouTube video we play on it together constitute technology. The last point brings me to the next question. What counts as technology? Living as we do in an age of information technology, it is not very helpful to think of technology as residing in external objects, be they tools or machines. Let us consider the first information technology, the invention of writing. One of the first systems of writing to emerge was in the ancient Mesopotamian civilization of Sumer from the 4th millennium BC onwards. The earliest cuneiform tablets belong to an accounting system in which scribes record what goods and services are owed to the ruler. Note that accounting, along with warfare, plays a significant role in the origins and development of technology. Rather like the smartphone and the YouTube video, it is the information and the physical device that together constitute the technology. The clay tablet and the stylus do not amount to the technology of writing. Human beings, long before writing, had made marks on clay. What was different about the cuneiform tablets, to paraphrase Ian Barber, was the application of organized knowledge to practical tasks by ordered systems of people and devices. Writing was an effective means to organize accounting tasks by scribes writing with styluses on clay tablets. The invention of writing allowed record keeping that expanded the complexity of social tasks that could be performed and transformed earlier societies. In the case of ancient Mesopotamia, writing was crucial for the coordination of the large amount of human labor required to build its irrigation systems. These in turn led to an intensification of agriculture, and with it, a rapid growth of population. The history of writing also demonstrates the portability of this first information technology, from clay tablets to more technologically advanced media, to the codex, the form of our modern book, at the turn of the first millennium, to the printing press halfway through the next millennium, and now to the screens of our electronic devices. Information technologies are especially mobile across historical periods and geographical regions. Although portability is an especially salient feature of information technologies, we do find it elsewhere. The real, or at least its technological principles, has constantly been reinvented. The combination and recombination of technologies is an important motor of technological innovation. I think I made a good case for viewing writing as a technology. But how expansive can a definition of technology be? This brings me to the work of Michel Foucault, who began his career as a historian of science. His interests, however, soon moved in a different direction. But towards the end of his life, he began writing a history of sexuality, in which he used the phrase technologies of the self. With it, he sought to indicate the practices that ancient philosophers recommended for the achievement of self-control that entailed the suppression of the passions. But are these ancient practices of self-control, or we could take the contemporary example of mindfulness practices, really technologies? If they are, then we are expanding technology not only to include those practices which transform the external world, but also all practices that seek to transform the self, even when no technological intervention in the external world occurs. These are purely mental technologies. The problem with such a broad definition is that when so many human practices fall into its scope, then the meaning of technology becomes very vague. One can understand why, in a world of smartphones and yoga classes, the phrase technologies of the self appeals as a metaphor for the self-improvement that high-tech gadgets promise to put in our reach. But is it really anything more than a metaphor? So let's look at the criteria that could support a narrower definition of technology. First and foremost, technology requires externality. A person is seeking to use something outside of the self. Let's take a smartphone message as an example. When sending such a message, we may be seeking to convey our feelings or influence the feelings of someone else. The smartphone is the external medium through which we do this. If we are in face-to-face contact with someone else, we don't need the external medium of a smartphone to convey our feelings. Does our voice then become technology? At this point, we get to examine one of the most important naming of technological things, the artifact. An artifact is something made by human beings and not found by them in nature. The smartphone is an artifact. The human voice is not. It is part of our natural human endowment. When we think of technology as existing in external artifacts, then the emphasis is on what requires a human act of making. This is a very helpful perspective to bring to information technologies. The smartphone brings together two artifacts or set of artifacts. On one hand, you have the artifact of a phone as a combination of physical materials, metal, plastic, silicon, etc. And on the other hand, you have the artifact of the phone as software, the apps and search engines. Both hardware and software are equally artifacts. Both are made by human beings. I would stress that we always need to qualify the technological artifact as external because we want to exclude more abstract usage of the word and emphasize that the technological artifact always exists outside in the world. To describe the technological artifact as external is not to say that technology has no effect on what goes on inside a human being. Their subjectivity, their thoughts, perceptions, and emotions. In the course, when we reach the section about cyborgs and post-humans, we will be looking precisely at how technology transforms what it is to be human. But that transformation is not purely internal, not purely mental processes. It is now time to examine two key concepts central to contemporary discussions of technology: affordances and design. The formation of a theory of affordances began with the work of James Gibson. In a 1977 article incorporated into his later book, The Ecological Approach to Visual Perception, Gibson proposed a psychological theory of how human beings perceive their environment. Gibbon was not especially concerned with technology and, not surprisingly for his era, thought of technological artifacts as tools that human beings encountered along with many other physical objects in their environment. Gibson's impact on the study of technology stems from his view that when human beings see physical objects in their environment, they always think about how they can physically interact with them, how they can use them. Yet, physical objects don't dictate how we can use them. It is our perceptions of how we might interact with them, constrained by the physical properties of the object, that constitute the object's affordances. Affordances are therefore not fixed, and how a physical object might be used is very much in the eye of the beholder. A hammer may be constructed in such a way that its heft makes it well suited to driving nails into walls. But, to give a gruesome example, the same ease at concentrating force in a specific area can turn a hammer into a weapon, even a lethal one. Nobody manufactures and markets a hammer as a weapon. It is not its intended use. This example points out that the use of a tool or any technological artifact is not limited to the affordances around which the maker constructed it. The user can perceive new affordances and implement new uses. Although Gibson wrote about tools as physical objects, his influence has been most pronounced in the discussion of information technologies. The more complex a technological artifact is, the greater its number of affordances, both intended and unintended. Social media, in particular, has had to face the consequences of the fact that the affordances of technology are so unpredictable. The addition of live streaming to social media has made it possible for events to be attended virtually by family and friends when they cannot be physically present. Unfortunately, the same functionality that allows a frail 80-year-olds to attend the weddings of their grandchildren was also used by a white supremacist to broadcast his massacre of 51 people in an attack on a New Zealand mosque in March 2019. The question of how affordances are built into technological artifacts immediately raises the topic of design. In the early 20th century, there were reform movements in the fields of art and architecture that developed a new vision of design in which aesthetics and technology united to create everyday objects which were both attractive and, to use a phrase from today, user-friendly. Most famous among these movements was the Bauhaus in Germany. The name of the exhibition that its founders organized in 1923 proclaimed their mission: art and technology, a new unity. Students were enrolled in workshops that were conceived as, quotes, laboratories for industry, and where the emphasis was on incorporating art into industrial products for mass consumption. So there were workshops dedicated to bookbinding, weaving, carpentry, and furniture. The Bauhaus aesthetic also expressed itself through workshops on graphic print and typography, and has had a lasting effect on graphic design. Adobe products, the graphic interfaces of the screens of our electronic devices, all bear the indelible mark of the modern aesthetic that originated in the Bauhaus. Industrial technology flourished in the 20th century because products of mass consumption became more complex. The goal was to make these products attractive to the consumer and intuitive for the user. The automobile was emblematic of the mass-produced but complex technological artifact that placed new demands on design. Car manufacturers, to compete successfully with their rivals, must make a car with an outer appearance that appeals to the aspiration and desires of the buyer. It must look sleek or fun or safe. At the same time, the technological complexity of a car has to be organized into the well-designed interface of the dashboard. The affordances that the car manufacturer chooses to place in the vehicle may nudge the driver towards certain actions. For example, automatic safety belts that the driver cannot easily forget to use. The automobile also presents the ethical issues that face designing technology. Cars over the last 3 decades have become increasingly packed with features that enhance the safety of the driver. But other road users, pedestrians, and cyclists have experienced a rising risk of death or serious injury when they are in collision with a car. This elevated risk is partly due to the aesthetic preferences of car buyers who favor SUVs over smaller cars. Whom car manufacturers protect becomes even more ethically problematic with the advent of the driverless car. When a pedestrian or cyclist recklessly rushes into the path of a driverless car and a collision is imminent, whose life and safety does the AI driver prioritize? The occupant of the car or the hapless pedestrian or cyclist? Designing technology today requires more than making it user-friendly and in tune with consumer preferences. This should not entail jettisoning the aesthetic dimension of technology design. For instance, if sustainable products are to achieve widespread adoption, they must be attractive to consumers. Nonetheless, excellent aesthetic design should not be used to mask ethically unpalatable features of a product's technical design. The earlier Bauhaus movement realized the ethical and political implications of design, which led to their suppression when the Nazis came to power in 1933. In this week's readings from the Handbook of Ethics, Values, and Technological Design, you will encounter the call for engineers to consider not just the technical efficacy of the products and systems that they design, but also their effects on human society and the planet.